Starting next year, parents will be required to pay for their children's national examination fees, a major shift from the current model where the government foots the bill for all learners. Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi says from next year, households that are able to pay should do so as part of a new targeted subsidy approach. Concerns had emerged this year that the government had not set aside money for exams. But Mbadi has clarified that there is a budget in place and parents should not panic. NTV's Rukia Bule sat down with the CS to unpack the budget for the national exams and began by asking him why the budget for national exams was scrapped off.
We have to review the cost. We have to review the cost in the sense that we must ask ourselves, why should we pay examination fees for all students, including those who are in private schools? We should be subsidizing examination for those who cannot afford it, especially in the public schools. So there is a whole question of review of the concept of paying for examination fees. But that, once it is concluded, we will make sure there is adequate and sufficient funds for examination. The other issue that we are also looking at is why should it cost so much to do our examination? So there's a lot of restructuring of this examination fees. So there should be no panic, no worry that there is no money for education, for examinations. There will be money for examinations, only that we are changing the system and structure.
When you say you will be changing the system and the structure, a lot of parents at the moment are anxious and uncertain. Could you perhaps give them assurance on what that looks like?
So, in brief, what we are saying is the students will be able to do their exams without making payment for it, especially those who cannot afford. But when you look at the restructuring, the Ministry of Education is going to look at why should we pay for those who can pay. Like today, if my child is doing KCSE, the government pays for that child and is a child of a CS. Why should that be the case? So we want to look at the whole question of who should be paid for. And that we will do for the next year's examination. For this year, it is too late. We are going to process examination for all the students, whether you are able or you are not able. But this is a question that the Ministry of Education must look into. We must assess who should we pay examination fees for. Is it everybody in this country who is doing exam or those who cannot afford? Because we cannot afford to subsidize people who don't need the subsidy.
And how will you determine who is able to pay for examination and who is not able to pay for it?
The Ministry of Education must come up with a criteria of identifying those who can pay examination fee. For example, if your child is learning in a private school where you pay 300,000, 1 million shillings in a year, honestly, can't you pay 5,000 for examination fee for that child? Why should you make Kenyans, taxpayers, some of whom can barely eke a living, to pay examination fee for your child?
You spoke that the Ministry of Education has come up with a criteria. Some might argue that education is free in Kenya and that it's not fair to segregate, make some pay and some not pay. What would be your response to that?
The responsibility of the government is to ensure that all children get education. So those who can afford it would afford it. Those who can afford it, it is a duty and responsibility of the government to make sure that it is afforded, that those children afford or get access to education, especially basic education. So there should be no worry that there is any child who will not get basic education in this country. All children will get basic education. The government will facilitate that. Those who are capable of providing education to their children should provide education to their children. And in any case, they provide in private schools and many other places. What we are saying is when it comes to examination, why then should you surrender that responsibility to the government, yet you have taken up that responsibility and you're educating your child, you're paying for their education in those private institutions which are charging you much higher. But those children who cannot afford to pay for their education and including examination fee, the government has a responsibility to ensure that that is done.
What's going to look like is private students will have to pay for their national examinations and public schools will be catered for the government.
What I'm saying is that those who can afford it will afford, or should afford to pay examination fees. But it should be understood that there is nobody called government with resources. The government uses the resources of Kenyans, some of whom are barely struggling to survive. And you take that money, instead of providing other essential services to them, including health provision, which is not even having adequate funding, including even that education. There are other budget lines like capitation, which we are not even providing enough. Why then should we use the little resources that we are collecting from Kenyans and then make examination fee free for people who can afford it? And also the cost of examination must be lowered. We must make sure that the printing of exams is done cheaply. So we are working around even seeing how we can better do the printing of examination without compromising quality and security of the same, but value for money in terms of producing them cheaply. You know, we are obsessed as a country of printing things outside the country. Yet we print passports here. Why would you take examinations out to be printed? Passports are even more security sensitive documents, but we are printing them locally. So we are saying you can even use government printer, for example, to print examinations. The only thing you need to do is to provide clear security checks and safety of those examinations, which even if you bring them from outside and you compromise on managing the security around them, you'd still end up having the examination leaked, and it has happened many times. So let us make sure that the cost of managing or administering examination, this country is content to bear minimum, guaranteeing quality of the same and safeguarding the examination, because we don't have too much resources to waste.